Hey gang, KR King here, helping one and all homebrew their own D&D campaign. Today's topic is using the eternal pursuit of treasure to your advantage as a GM. And this came from a comment by longtime viewer Joel Anderson on my recent video on the GM Roundtable about burnout as a GM. How does it arise and ways to, get rid of it? And Joel said a source for him is the fact that his players just love to fight monsters and get loot. They're not as interested in the storylines, the world building that he does. And what I did was suggested some ideas on creating treasure that encourage storylines, encourage the players to investigate, to look for things and whatnot. And this kind of got me thinking about, the classic adventurers in the real world are often motivated by potential reward, some great treasure, as opposed to simply the joy of discovery. Because there are tens of thousands of shipwrecks that have gone down in the oceans, seas, and lakes of the world, but it's usually the ones that went down with some great treasure that are investigated. People are going to put all this time and effort into finding them. Lost mines and temples, the pyramids, this kind of thing, buried treasure. These are the sort of things that are great adventures to seek out because there are great rewards. And all of these have as a central theme the pursuit of filthy lucre. And even a system like 5e, which doesn't reward gold like it did, the old systems where you got experience for gold. It still is something players desire. They want to, collect gems and jewels and whatnot. They want to buy stuff. Eventually at the higher levels, it starts to become like, why do I have all this? But there's no beating human nature. So what I suggested to Joel in my comment was to use partial items. That is an item, let's just say the classic, a rod that comes in several parts. The players find one part. They have some information on this item. Let's say it doesn't work at all, but they find out about this and they go and they search for the other parts of this rod to assemble this and have some powerful item. And I suggested too, you can have a magic lute that is missing its strings. You have magic strings, you got to go find those. You might find an item that a wizard created and has to have a special focus. Maybe his focus may be specific to the item. The players have to go find that focus in order to use the item. So the players have to discover what that focus was or what some relevant piece to this item was or is if it's not clear. Then they have to get clues to find out where it last was seen, where it might be now. And the idea here is that you're giving the players a promise for some magic item, potentially really powerful, but they've got to do some work to get it. They've got to figure out some clues, solve some puzzles. Maybe they have to help some NPC. That person, the NPC has the information, or they want them to do this. And what you're doing is you're generating players' motivation to do the storylines of your world. Now, if you're going to use the partial magic item, you got to think about the power of this item relative to both your group and the effort that it takes to do this. So suppose you have this magic pipe and it needs special dust of some kind. You put it in the pipe and then it has the effect and the players aren't sure. So they go through these long quests and they kill this and they investigate that and they get a clue and they go and they finally get the magic dust. They put it in the pipe and the pipe is the smoke of wondrous monsters, which basically just creates a 1-foot smoke image of some monster. That might be considered a slight screw job, unless you say, okay, this item in and of itself is not that powerful, but there's some NPC out there that's collecting all the items relevant to some former great wizard. This is the last piece in her collection, and if the players find this, she will give them some great reward. Again, the greed factor. Now, you could get a little meta and say that the story of this item is about the greed of the person that one time had this pipe of smoke. The players go through all this stuff. They finally get this item. They put the dust in, and it's a worthless item, showing them the true meaning of such eternal greed. But again, your players may be like, you know what my meta commentary is on your epic quest for this worthless item? Screw job. So you want to make sure you have an item that is worth the effort that the players are putting into it to put it together. So let's say you have a rod in 3 parts. Put them together and you've got a rod of absorption. That's a pretty nice item. It absorbs up to 50 levels of spells, and then the player can then use that for their own spells, those levels, to have spells, extra spells in terms of what they get every day. And then you decide, when you find the item, how many spells have already been absorbed. I think it says 10D something. I can't remember, but you can look it up. But again, if it's putting it all together in this quest, maybe it has all 50 levels available to it. What you want to avoid here is having something like the classic rod that's all in parts, the rod of 7 parts, which when all put together is an artifact, the rod of law, but all the individual parts are very deadly. Unless you have you run some high-level campaign where everyone's 15th or 20th or something. Because what's going to be guarding a rod of law or the rod of 7 parts? Very powerful creatures. And if you do just give it away, players are wielding this super powerful item. So you do want to balance it in terms of the amount of effort it takes to get these, and then the end result, how powerful is the item. But there are many other things that can motivate players out of their inherent greed for treasure to embark on epic storylines. Let's say you have just a piece of information that will lead to some great treasure. The classic is a literal piece of a map, a corner ripped off or something. I have a whole video on creating treasure maps. Check that out. I'll have a link up here. But suffice to say, it doesn't always have to just be a treasure map. The players, it could be some parchment that talks about some treasure, some bit of information, some artwork that shows something that, is a clue that no one else has ever figured out. And this may be a well-known legendary treasure such that, it's thought of perhaps more as myth than reality, although we know in D&D there are no myths. And there's some cool ways you could have a message in a bottle that's found washed up on a beach, perhaps by the players, perhaps they see it in some curio shop or something, I don't know, however it is. And this gives information to a legendary shipwreck. So you could either have an underwater adventure if that's the way you want to go, but you could also have some uncharted island. This was the last sailor that, before he died, he wrote out this message and put it in a bottle. And in terms of storylines, when you have a legendary treasure like this, the players find out maybe just a bit of the information or whatever. You have competition. You could have other NPCs, other sentient monsters, whatever, that are also searching for this treasure. They may have other bits of clues. The players find this out somehow, and they have to go and either kill these creatures or negotiate or something like that. Also, these creatures, if they find out that the players they found a bottle that says the location of the great treasure, but I control some item that will allow them to actually go into the shipwreck or whatever, control this item, however, whatever your imagination says, now they might begin to follow the players or directly confront them. And the larger the treasure, the greater the threat posed by those who possess other informations or begin to stalk the players. What you're doing here is you're using the natural greed of players to motivate them to explore the storylines and solve the puzzles and, all work their way through the ideas that you've created in your world. But you're not railroading them. You want to have these things such that if the players say, I'm not interested, or that sounds too deadly, or whatever, they can just walk away. But as I mentioned in an earlier video, there was a famous guru of the 19th century who visited England, and he was asked by these acolytes that came along, don't tell us, sir, is there one truth that you can tell us about the world? And he said, yes, in all my travels, I've discovered that every person everywhere is essentially greedy. So your players will be motivated to find this item out of that. The other thing is, don't make an item like this. The entire fate of the material plane hinges on its discovery and control, because then you are sort of railroading. You're always adjusting things to the level of your party, and you're not trying to unbalance your world. You're not trying to force the players in. Let their natural greed motivate them, because it's fun. Another thing you can have as treasure that motivates players is when you have a magic item that cannot be, its purpose or powers or whatever, cannot be identified in conventional means. Basically, an identify spell does not give the player information on what this is, what it does, this sort of thing. Now, you can say, well, that's what the spell says. It's a first-level divination spell. This is an example where the rules can be a suggestion. You don't want to do this all the time, but maybe when the item was created, the creator put in there some aspect of this magic that made its true purpose only known to someone who either had a phrase or a spell or some other item or something that the players have to discover. So they know it's magic. Maybe they know something about what the type of magic is, but they don't really know what it does. And then they have information or clues wherever they find this that will lead them to this other bit of information or item or whatever that will unlock the secrets of this item. And it doesn't just have to be a wand of fireballs or something, right? The item, when the nature of hiding this, whatever, this is an item that actually serves to unlock the secrets of some other treasure or to operate some other item, right? You can have a chain of things that this hidden magic item does, such that the players, they find out, they learn from this item, and this is the guardian, this is what can prevent the guardian of some great treasure from attacking the group. What is this great treasure? Where is that? Are there further protections and whatnot involved? It could be the key to using some gate. Do they want to go through this? What are they going to find at the other end? What's the promise that's at the other end? And again, if they're like Joel Anderson's players, they're going to be motivated by their greed. Another classic magic item that you can use, which is what I say treasure, right? They pursue the treasure, they find some item, they're trying to figure out what it does. And it's a pain in the ass item. The classic, of course, is the cursed item. And I've talked about these before in other videos, such that the player, uses it, they think it does this, and they don't realize it, and then all of a sudden it becomes clear that maybe only to the other players or something that it's a cursed item. The player that has it can't get rid of it unless, sometimes you just use a remove curse or dispel magic, but sometimes it's powerful enough such that they have to go somewhere else, to some other place, and find some item or some spell or something that will remove this. This is kind of a negative usage of the greed factor. It can also be a curse, which once the players use this or, perform its function or whatever, and they realize that something has happened to an area or a group or something, some kind of curse or bad event, now the players, are motivated to try to remove this curse or prevent or alter this effect because they're the ones that started it. Now, it can be just out of the goodness of their hearts or guilt or whatever that they've done this thing and they've got to remove this, but can also be that they hear about some great reward if someone comes along and removes the bad effect. Notice a pattern here? But the pain in the ass covers other things as well. You could have a very rare and valuable treasure item that in and of itself causes problems. So think about some super rare gem like the Hope Diamond or the Star of India or whatnot. First of all, the players find this, and it's going to be difficult to fence or whatever, perhaps simply because of its great value, but perhaps also because of its provenance. And remember that, the Hope Diamond is not really cursed in the real world, but in the world of D&D, curses are very real. So that's another thing about some valuable thing. People don't necessarily want to buy it, or evil types are very interested in finding this item because they're very interested in the magic that produced this evil curse. So with a provenance, there might be something in this gem. You look at the different facets and you see information in terms of its history, in terms of who first found it or cut it or whatever. Again, in the world of D&D, it may have some magical properties, not necessarily just like those found in the Dungeon Master's Guide or something where throws the spell or does it. You can have that. And maybe it has to be unlocked, like we talked about in earlier ones with the different parts. But also, it may provide information in terms of these facets, in terms of this provenance of some great treasure hidden by this legendary king who had this made for his wife when she was killed, and he buried all his treasures in this fantastic tomb protected by all sorts of things that have been lost. Suddenly, this Star of India type gem has been found, and it contains supposedly clues to this great treasure. And the item that is part of a larger treasure, the classic is the Arkenstone in The Hobbit. Someone shows up with the Arkenstone somewhere, and people are going to be like, well, do you know where the larger treasure is? And perhaps the players just found this somewhere. They have no idea where it is. But there may be groups, NPCs, monsters, whoever that want this treasure that are going to begin either to confront the players, shadow them, try to find out information. And what this does is it either puts the player characters on the run. Either they take on this force or they discover, it's too powerful for us. What do? Do you just hand over the gem and say we know nothing? Or do you go and search for the treasure? Now, another thing for the treasure-seeking group is you have a legendary treasure that's well-known. The location is well-known, but for whatever reason, it's impenetrable. Think of in the real world, Oak Island, this legendary treasure that, hundreds of years people have searched for it. People have died digging this hole. It keeps flooding. Most, historians, people like that say this is just a classic fake treasure. People still believe in it. Well, are there fake treasures like Oak Island in the world of D&D? I don't think so. It's a treasure whose entrance is either guarded by some force. Let's say they've taken over, they built a keep. The keepers of the treasure, the keepers of Oak Island type thing, they're not letting anyone in that entrance. They're determined to get through there themselves. They're researching the spells, whatnot. It might be extra dimensional. Who knows what it is? But the players discover with a map or with something, an alternate route into this treasure. Can they get through here, whatever, dwells there or whatever? Can they get behind basically this barrier and loot the treasure without the force at the usual entrance finding this out? Or do they find something that says, hey, there's a method to beat this force that these guys in the fort don't know? Would the players go there and try to work with the fort, or do they try to sneak in? A small crew of, adventurers can sneak in there, get the treasure, come back out. And what you're doing here is, instead of punishing the players for having goals and how they're playing the game, we want treasure, but you're using their motivation, their interest in playing the game to get them to work their way through your storylines. Because you've had 1,000 battles, you played forever, you're just not interested in that. They're saying, well, we want to kill things, we want to get treasure. So what you do with that treasure is you just leave a trail of breadcrumbs for the players who will be motivated by their desire for more treasure to follow their way through your storyline. And maybe I'll have other creatures, NPCs, also looking for this greater treasure or this item, such that they're following or harassing the players, or they have to confront them. And again, in summation, what you want to make sure is it's a sandbox type of a treasure, such that the players could just say, you know what, it's not worth the risk. The monsters are too deadly. We're not there yet or whatever. We're just going to have to ignore this. But will they? I think not. So hopefully that gives you some ideas on motivating your players, especially the ones that just seem to want to just fight, hack and slash, and get treasure. You're motivating them to explore the storylines of your world. If you like my content, please subscribe, leave some comments, tell me about some, treasure items or ways you've gotten to motivate your players. But most importantly, keep playing D&D and tell somebody else about it.